Hey everyone, I hope you're having a great day. So now that 4.2 is finally out, I wanted to put a particle effects tutorial together for you. This is going to be a deep dive tutorial looking at the various settings that make up the particle effects system in Godot. Now there is a lot of excellent documentation on the Godot website already about particle effects, and I'll put a link in the comments below. But for those of you that maybe prefer to see a more visual example, then this tutorial may be for you. I'm certainly not an expert, and there are definitely some settings that don't seem to make a lot of sense to me, and I'll point that out as I go through them. And if you do see or know something that I've missed, then please comment below. That would be really appreciated. So this is going to be a two-part tutorial. In this part we'll cover the basics, although by basics that's pretty much 90% of what you need, like the effects I just showed you. But in part 2 we'll go through some of the more advanced topics like turbulence, collisions, sub-emitters, etc. Things that would make this video longer than it already is. And at the end, as a bonus, I'll go through how to create some of these effects that you see here. So grab a cup of coffee, sit back and relax while I take you through particle effects. Let's get set up. Okay, I've created a basic scene here just to give us something interesting to look at while we go through particle effects. It's just a world node 3D there with a world environment and a floor. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to click on world and I'm going to right click and do add child node. And then I'm going to search for particles, or particle in this case, yeah. And you can see that we've got two options here. One is CPU particles 3D and one is GPU particles 3D. Now you can probably guess what the difference is. CPU particles 3D runs its processing on the CPU, and the GPU particles 3D runs its processing on the GPU. Now it's not quite as obvious as that. A lot of CPUs now can handle GPU related commands and what have you, but we're going to be using GPU particles 3D because if I'm understanding some of the documentation, CPU particles 3D may actually be deprecated in the future. It's meant for older devices, older mobiles, older PCs, and obviously PCs that don't have dedicated graphics cards. But this GPU particles 3D is what we're going to go with, and I suggest that's what you look at today because these are the features that we're going to be looking at. So let's click on create. And here we go. We get our box here, and I'm just going to drag that up. We've got, like I say, we've got this yellow box. Well, what is it? Well, it's actually not unique to GPU particles 3D. It's what Godot uses to define whether or not this is active or not, based on whether the camera can see it. I find it quite obtrusive. So what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to click on View and then Gizmos. And if we go to GPU particles 3D, I think I might need to click it twice, and there we go, and we can hide it. But nothing is happening. It's just actually just an empty thing, a node there. And you can see we've got a couple of warnings here. Nothing is visible because meshes have not been assigned to draw passes, and the material to process the particle is not assigned, so no behavior is imprinted. I think that's a very difficult message to understand if you were to come straight into Godot and try and play around with particle physics. What they're referring to are these two tabs here. I'm actually going to jump a little bit ahead here and create these just to show you, but we'll certainly come back to those. What we're going to do very quickly is I'm going to click a process material here, and I'm just going to create a new particle process material. And then under draw passes, I'm going to click on pass 1, and I'm just going to create a new sphere mesh. Don't pay too much attention to that. All I was doing was just getting it working. And now we can see that we do in fact have something happening. We have these spheres being generated and dropping down from our node's position. Well, why is it doing that? Well, it's actually doing that because gravity is set at the moment, so they're dropping down, but they are sort of dropping down a little bit and then they're disappearing. So let's have a little look at the basic settings that we've got here. We've got this emitting setting. Well, guess what? If you turn that off, it stops emitting, and if you turn it on, it starts emitting again. That makes sense. We've got an amount here, okay, and that is 8. And what that is saying is that at any time during the emission, particularly if it's looping like it is now, 8 of the particles will be active. Okay, so this is an important number, and we're going to talk about what that actually means, because the spawn rate at the moment is based on time, and we'll come to that in a few moments. But you can see that at any point there are 8 being emitted at any point during the lifetime of the particle effect. Moving on to amount ratio. This is one that's confusing me a little bit, so if you do understand this one, please let me know. It does make general sense, but what actually it looks like in practice is quite different. It's saying the amount of particles that should be emitted. So at the moment 1, which is fine, which is basically saying, yeah, do as you're told. But if I just move that down to something like let's say 0.4, it doesn't seem to produce emissions in any sort of meaningful way. It's almost like it's gone random. I don't quite understand how this is working. There is another effect or another setting in time that we can look at that seems to make a lot more sense to me and seems to be a lot more predictable. So I would leave this one alone. By all means, have a play with these things. This is what you end up doing with particle effects. You play with them until you find something you like. But I'm going to set that back to 1. And the final setting we've got here is sub-emitter. And like I say, that's something we're going to be looking at in the next tutorial. But the effect of a sub-emitter is that once this is finished emitting, you can have it do something else. So this is particularly useful for things like fireworks, where perhaps you want a firework to come out and then to spawn multiple fireworks off the back of that, something, an effect like that. But we'll look at that in the next tutorial. For now, that's the basics of getting a GPU Particles 3D set up on your scene. Okay, let's talk about the time settings, and the first one we see here is lifetime. It's probably one of the most important settings of all the particle effect settings you're going to see today. As this name suggests, it says how long this particle is going to last. So if we set this to 2 seconds, what we'll see now is that suddenly the emission rate drops basically to half what it did before, and there's a reason for that, and I hope it makes some sense, is that now there are still 8 particles being emitted, but of course they're lasting a lot longer. So the emitter is if we drag those up there, you can see that there's still 8 being done, but now suddenly it's not having to emit particles as quickly. And by the same token, if we do 0.5, of course each particle will be a lot shorter, but then the emissions will have to be a lot quicker. So this is the number you're going to play around with a lot to get this right. The amount and lifetime are 2 figures that you're going to be playing around with a lot when you play around with Godot. I'm going to set that back to 4 and 1 or something like that, so you can get a real feel for what it looks like. Okay, interpret to the end is a bit of an odd one. I can't actually work out what this one means. If you do know and do understand it, then please do let me know. It says causes all the particles in the node to interpolate towards the end of their lifetime. Well, there is an interpolate checkbox down here that seems to do the same thing. I certainly can't notice any difference in general. You can change the setting. You see it looks to be the same. Again, play around with these. I would leave this one alone for now. I don't seem to think it makes a lot of difference with everything I've played around with, but by all means, if you do know of any advantage for this one, let me know. I'll set that back to 0. One shot, basically what that's saying is once it's finished emitting, in this example 4, it will stop. Let's do a few more. Let's do 100, let's say. Okay, and if I turn it back on, if I click emit, what it'll do is it'll emit 100 and then it will stop emitting. So this is something that you would use for something like an explosion, where you wouldn't want it to keep looping the explosion, you'd want it to do it in one go. Okay, so that's one shot there. I'm going to turn that off and put that back to something like, I'm playing with the numbers here just to kind of give you a variety of what's going on. Okay, so you can see 4 are being emitted. If we look at pre-process is a useful one if you want the emissions to look like the effects to look like they have been running for a while. So if I just turn this off and then on again, what you will see is that 1, 2, 3, 4 gets generated. Okay, and if I turn that off and then on again, you'll see 1, 2, 3, 4 gets generated. But if let's just say we want it to look like it's been going like this for a while, let's say 2 seconds. If I press 2, enter, okay, and now when I turn it off, I have to wait for them to finish. And then click on, it goes straight in there, okay, like it's been running for ages. I think my graphics card's letting me down a little bit here, but you get the idea, that it actually goes straight into what it would look like. Okay, so that's obviously used for something like a fire, perhaps, or something like that, where you want the fire to be showing like it's, it's not going to suddenly rise from the wood, from the ashes, and suddenly create the fire. You want to see it in action. Okay, speed scale. This is a very useful one. You can use this to do things like speed up the particle effects or slow them down. So what you can use this for is actually pausing. If you set it to 0, look, you can actually stop the particle effects altogether. It does cause a weird effect in the editor. I don't think that effect exists when you're in game, but it does look a little bit jumpy in there. But on the same token, you can speed it up as well. You can make it go crazy or what have you. So this gives you a little bit of flexibility to do all sorts of things. Perhaps as you're playing with the particle effect, you can adjust the speed scale. I'm going to make this a little bit longer for the next setting. Let's make that 2 seconds long. Okay. Now, explosiveness is how quickly all of these will be delivered in one go. Okay. So at the moment they're being distributed in a nice even format, 1, 2, 3, 4 every 2 seconds, right? So it's 1 every half a second. If you wanted to give it a little bit more upfront emissions, so let's set to 0.5. What you'll see is that they all get distributed in the first half of the lifetime. Okay, now so we get 4 and then we get a delay, and then you get 4 and then you get a delay. This would be another very good example of when you would want to an explosion. You wouldn't want it to be kind of slowly emitting. You would want some level of explosiveness. If you do one, then they all come out at once and you can't even see. So you may want to play around with this and pick something like 0.8, something like that, and then get it to. You'll see they all come out at once. So that would be a very useful one for an explosion. Okay, I'll set that back to there. Randomness is another good one. Again, I find this a very useful one for something like a fire, perhaps, where you want the emissions to have a little bit of randomness to them, not pure uniformness. So if you set this to something like fire, whatever, you make it fully random, and then it'll just emit them at a variety of rates, which is I think possibly a little too much. So you want to have a little play with a little blend on this, so it still keeps at something that like you expect, but not crazy. So randomness is that effect that you the setting that you'd want to use there. Okay, the fixed FPS. So what this is doing is saying how many times for each of these particles do I need to recalculate where I am. Now, at first glance, that might think, well, 30 is too low. Well, it is in essence, but you can actually mix and match them with these interpolate ones. If I turn them off, it might look a little bit jaggedy. Let's turn that a little bit lower and you'll see what I mean. If I make that 15... you can really see the difference now, can't you? Okay, that it's actually doing 15 frames a second. But there are a couple of settings that can help you out here, and they are interpolate and fractional delta. So interpolate, what this does is it says, well, every frame I'm going to check to see where it would be based on the calculations of those emissions. So interpolate then moves it back to a nice smooth kind of run there. Do you see? So it's actually saying, well, although it's only updating itself 15 times a second, I'll fill in the gaps for you and let you know where I think you should be. Okay, and fractional delta actually kind of adds to that, and this is useful if you've got a lot of particles. It adds a little bit of extra cleanliness to it, I think. But this is my take on it. It doesn't make a huge difference, but it's another one of those flags you might want to play with just to see if it improves your effect. It does add a level, obviously. A lot of these add a lot of processing overhead. So but play with these to get them right. So if I put this down to 5, hopefully here we go. This is a good example. So even though interpolate's on, it's still not doing a great job there. Yeah, so you want to play around with these and get something that's being. I think 30 seems to be an acceptable level. Well, by the way, we're using spheres here. Spheres aren't the only thing we're going to emit from this. I'm just using spheres because they seem to be very clear and easy to follow as they drop. Okay, so yeah, have a play with interpolate and have a play with fractional delta to get the setting that you like. I have a feeling that the lower you can get away with here, the better. But also, you probably want to try this on different systems to get something to make sure that it's actually working for you. Okay, so that's the time settings. Moving on to drawing. Okay, in order to understand the drawing settings, we need to turn back on our GPU Particles 3D gizmo. There we go, so we can see it. So what is this yellow box? Now, like I say, my understanding of this yellow box is it's a box that tells the camera when it should be enabled or active, and if it's not in view, then in theory, something like that, the particle effect would not need to be run. However, in practice, I've really struggled to get this to disable, so I'm not 100% sure the inner workings of Godot here. I believe the general advice is make this as small as you can if you need to. Right, so we can just do this here and then make it smaller. So in theory now, you need to have the camera needs to be have it in shot more for it to be active. But I've not found this to be a perfect science. So again, this is one of those ones. If somebody can advise me on how this drawbox works, I honestly think you do not need to worry about this. Just get this reset. It's probably one of those things you may have to come across when you start optimizing your code. But for now, I would say you can actually just leave that well alone. There is a setting in here that I do believe is important, which is this local coords here. So if I just drag this across here, no, sorry, not that one, Control Z that, and just grab you'll see something that's happening here. I hope you'll see that they are actually following the spheres are actually following my transform, and so they're dropping, but they're staying in line. Now, if I turn that to local, what you'll see now is that they initially, after a weird drop from the sky, they will actually follow and stick to the actual GPU particle node itself. Okay, so there's an effect there that you might want to think about. This would be an example where you probably would want to have it sticking to it for a jet engine, the thrust coming out of the back of a jet engine. But perhaps if you were, I don't know, running smoke off the back of a car, you'd probably want to run something a bit more like this, where you would have it kind of leaving a trail behind it. So that's probably the only setting I touch on here. Like I said, this isn't unique to GPU Particles 3D. It's actually a fairly standard setting, this visibility AABB, and there's a fair amount of information on there. I haven't looked into it into great detail because I haven't needed to yet. Again, it's probably an optimization level technique that you may want to have a look at later on. But for now, that is basically everything you need to know about drawing. Okay, before we move on to the main event, which is the process material, I did want to talk about draw passes, and I actually don't like the term draw pass. I wish they'd call it something like emission pass, because a draw pass is what gets emitted. It's the actual thing that's getting emitted each time. As you know, we've been using a sphere mesh, but what you could potentially do is use a box mesh as well, and there we go, it's creating boxes for you. And this is the sort of thing that you may want to use, but generally speaking, you'll probably be using a quad mesh. And what you'll be doing is you'll be setting the let me just change the size just a bit bigger. What you'll be generally be doing is you'll be putting an image here, and then and that image will have some transparency, and it will always face towards you. It's not at the moment, you can see it's actually disappearing when we go behind it, but we'll set up a setting so that it's always facing towards you. And this is a very efficient way of creating particles. Doing the way we were doing with a sphere mesh is not hugely efficient. You can see it's creating, well, I don't know how many verts that is, but it's got 64 segments, 32 rings. So you can imagine that would be quite an overhead. It's okay right now. I mean, we can create quite a lot of these, and it's not really noticing any difference. We can do 1,000 probably. And yeah, my computer seems to be okay with this. Doesn't seem to be having a problem. But of course, there's nothing else in the scene, so it's not really struggling. So what we'll be doing later on when I'm going through the examples is we'll be using a quad mesh. I'm actually going to change this to a box mesh for now, because in a moment we're going to start seeing some of the rotation effects, and that's going to be very difficult to spot when we are using a sphere. So let's keep with the box mesh. Okay. The other thing that's worth mentioning is I did mention the fact that you can have multiple passes. Now, if I set this to 2, so what we could potentially do is have a second pass of let's just say a sphere mesh. And you can't see it because it's probably too small, so maybe I'm going to make it bigger. Hang on. There you go. You can see it sticking out now. So, but the annoying thing about this for me is that it's not alternating them. It's doing them at the same time. It's doing the same amount at the same time. I'm not clear on what advantage this gives having multiple passes. Had it alternated between the two, that would have been tremendous, but it doesn't seem to be actually doing that. I can't find a way to make it do it. Any of the settings like rotation and scale, they apply to both of them. They're not unique. So I'm not going to use this now. If you know a use case where this would be relevant, then please let me know. But we're going to stick with box mesh and sphere mesh now, just to show you the various settings in process material, because if I used a quad mesh, it can be a little bit difficult to visualize some of the settings. By using this, it's actually quite a clever way of sort of getting over a Godot deficiency, which is that you can't see some of the settings very easily. The skin setting is seemingly unneeded. The skin is to do with bone animations and I think attachments between the bones. I cannot find a use case that if you click on here on the documentation, there is none. It just says there's currently no description for this property. If you go to skin, there's no actual information on here, but it is something to do with bones and animations. So I think for now you can probably just completely skip that. But the key thing here is that the pass itself defines what is going to be emitted at each point. And for now we will sit with the box and the sphere, but we'll move on to quads once we go to our examples. So that's draw passes. And we are on to the main event, as I've said, the process material itself. So for all of the other things we've done, the process material kind of controls what happens to the emitted particles, the speed, its angle, its size, its alpha, all of that stuff it's going to control through its lifetime. Okay, so if we click on process material here, it's currently empty, like it was at the start. We do have the option for a shader material, so if you really know your stuff, get into shaders, you can create shader-based particles. I'm not going to be doing that. I'm going to be doing a new particle process material here, which is kind of like the default standard. And here we go. We're back to where we were a moment ago. Now, on its own, this little guy here, I don't know why this hasn't been given one of its own subcategories, but lifetime randomness, as the name suggests, allows you to from the time of life here to 2 seconds. I'm guessing now you can go from anywhere between 0 and 2 seconds, and then if you do half, that's something, I think that's something like between 1 and 2 seconds in this example. Okay, depending on, so you can, and again, this is probably a very useful feature just to tweak, just to give you a little bit of variation as you go along. Okay, so I'm going to leave that back to where it was to keep everything kind of standard and straightforward. Okay, the particle flags themselves, these are flags that allow you to kind of position where things are. Now, for quad meshes, which is what we'll be looking at later on, you don't need to worry too much about these. If you want to rotate them, I think you need to make sure that rotate Y is on. Things like align Y will ensure that it stays aligned on the Y axis, and again, disable Z. Stops it moving on the Z-axis. There we go. There we go. You can see that example there. Okay, and damping as friction allows you to adjust things like the acceleration and deceleration of that particle. Now, I'm not going to go into huge amounts of information about acceleration, deceleration, and damping and all that stuff, because you may want to play around with that with the particles that you're using. It's certainly not something that I've had a need for, the linear acceleration and those sorts of things. Because I found that all of the other particles seem to suffice. So the ones I really care about, align Y and rotate Y, are kind of the key ones here. You can disable those, like I say, if you're using quad meshes, it doesn't really matter. So that's the particle flags. The spawn, this specifies, again, as the name suggests, how it spawns. Okay, so this is at spawn time, and the first, probably one of the most important ones, is how it spawns. Right, what type of shape is it using for a spawn? Now, I'm just skimming straight over the offset and scale. The offset was obviously whereabouts it's starting relative to the nose position, and it's the shape scale, which is this one here. So if we click on this, we get a list of possible options. Now, we've got a point right now, like I say, makes perfectly good sense. But if I do sphere, this allows us to spawn from a sphere that we cannot see. This is one of the most annoying things that I think in Godot. If we was able to see the size of this sphere, we would have a really good idea of what was going on, but we don't. So what I'm going to do, let's just set that to, what was it, 1? I just noticed there's no reset option on here, is there? That's interesting. One for Godot to take a look at. We have no idea whereabouts this sphere is, and so in order to fix this, what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to turn off, if you just bear with me, accelerations. I'm just going to turn off gravity. We'll come to that in a moment, but if I just turn that off now, you can see that there's a sphere here. Now, it's very difficult to know what's going on, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn this up to something like 1,000. And now you get an idea. Actually, it might have been easier if I'd used a sphere for this, for the draw pass. Shall I do a sphere for the draw pass? Well, we can make the sphere bigger. Let's make the sphere bigger. And there we go. You can see, you get a real idea now of the sphere that it's using as its emission point. Okay, now at the moment it's just kind of emitting at any point in there, but you get the idea now. You can see that it could emit anywhere. This is very useful if you want to have perhaps a sphere object that you're not using gravity on. And just allow you to kind of create a sort of sphere look. The other one you can have is sphere surface, and for that to be more visible, I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to change the draw pass back to a sphere and make it very small. Oh, well, there we go. That's rather cool, isn't it? And if we make the sphere size, make the sphere size like, I don't know, 0.1, 0.2. There you go. Now you can get a real feel for what's happening here. Okay, this is something, like I say, you cannot see easily based on the settings here. It's very difficult, but by doing this sort of thing, you can get an idea, and then perhaps change it to a quad mesh later on when you know what's going on. So you can see this is, and what the way that one of the effects I created was a kind of sphere, and then I rotated this something like that sort of mini map that you got from the when they were attacking the Death Star. Not quite as fancy as that, but it looks a bit like that. So there you go. So you can really see now what's going on by creating a large number of particles and playing around with the emission shapes. Let's have a look at a couple of others. Box. Well, you're going to easily be able to guess what that does. That emits from a sort of box size. And then points and directed points. Now I may go on to talk about them in a subsequent tutorial, but the way it works is you can actually create a mesh. And use that mesh as a emission points. A good example of this would be something like a river, where perhaps you want to have bubbles coming out of the river. You can create a mesh along that river and say, right, please use these as the points for the river. And I'll talk about how to do that. It's not particularly difficult. But you can click over here, create emission points from node, and it'll ask you what node you want to use, and it will then create the emission points for you, and you can use that. Okay, so that's another thing you can do. It's a little bit out of the scope of this one, and directed points is very, very similar to that. That basically just says which direction those points can go. So it uses the normals of the mesh. And finally, ring. This is one I have used for the a couple of my effects. Let's just make that a little bit bigger, shall we? By changing the height. Now, this is a confusing thing. Sometimes you have to play around with the axis. So I'm going to try changing that to 1 and that to 0, and try and work out which axis is which. I cannot tell you. Let's just do 1. Let's try that one on the axis 1, and that's 0. There. You can play around with these until you get the shape you desire. It's a little bit difficult to see. There we go. We can see now. Okay. If I just change that back, I think I'm pretty sure it's that one there, and then change that back to 0, and we can see. I hope that it's now. There we go. Flat. Yeah, and something that would have been very, very difficult to see had we not used this kind of emission thing. I'm going to make the height a little bit lower. Let's make 0.1, and you'll really get a feel for it. There we go. There we go. Now you can really see what's going on, right? You can really see. This is kind of like a bubbling cauldron, isn't it? Here you go. I'll create an effect without even trying. So now you can really see. And what you can do as well is, if you want to, you can. It doesn't have to be the whole thing. You can actually make the inner radius. So let's make that 0.05, and you'll see when they disappear. I hope. Or was it 0.2? There we go. Let's try 0.5. Here we go. You're starting to see it. There we go. Now we're getting a real effect around the ring. In fact, you can see one of the effects that I use does exactly this. I do 0.9, and then it rises up. There you go. Now we've got something like a weird looking ring. I don't know what this looks like now. Maybe some sort of bubbling donuts here. So that's the position of the spawn. Okay. And another thing you can do now is you can choose the. I'm going to drop that right down now, so it's a bit more not up, down. Okay, so now we've got this. Let's try maybe 100. I want to try to find something so it's nice and obvious what it is. 50? 50 is not too bad, is it? And let's make them last a bit longer now that they're not. No, 10's too much, obviously. Let's try 5. Okay, so now there we go. We're going to see that they're kind of going around that ring. Now, in terms of the position, that one's done. In terms of the angle, this is the angle that it's going to start off minimum and maximum. So this is going to add a touch of randomness to it. Again, for this to work, we're going to want to change the draw path to a cube. New box mesh, sorry, there we go. And obviously set the size to much, much smaller. Let's go 0.1. Okay, there we go. Now we can see what's going on. And if we go back up to here, up to minimum maximum, so I think you can just do minus 720 to 720, and you should see they are spawning at different angles. Can you see that there? Okay. And by there's a lot of these where you'll see there's a curve, okay, and you can control how much between those two values, how popular it should be. So if you do a new curve texture, click on here. This is consistent across, right? But what we can do is we can say it's more likely to be 720. There, I think that means it's more likely to be along the 720 there. So it's producing a rather weird result, that, isn't it? I've never used it on this one before, so that's interesting. Again, I might have to seek out some advice on that one. It seems to be wobbling between the two. I'm even wondering if that's actually broken. Okay, so that's the actual angle min and max. So that gives you some randomness in terms of how it spawns and what angle it spawns. You can imagine that would be very useful. Again, you don't want to have a pure uniform, emission each time. You can set some values on there. So let's close those down, just so we're and get rid of the curve texture. There we go. Velocity. Okay, now we're talking. This is where we can actually say what velocity this particle is traveling at when it gets emitted. Okay, now this is a big one. At the moment, we don't have any velocity whatsoever, so this spread is irrelevant. I'm going to change this spread to 0, and I'm also going to change the position again to point. Okay, now at the moment, that's going to result in just the one here. Actually, I'm going to change the time back to 2 seconds. Okay, so at the moment we can't see anything because there is no velocity. So let's give it some velocity. You can see it's got a direction here, which is X. All right, but I'm going to change this to a direction of Y. 1 there. Okay, so this is going straight up. All right, and I'm going to ignore the spread and the flatness for now. I'm going to change the minimum velocity to say 2 and the maximum to 5. And now I seem to have more. That's like 10 or something like that. And now suddenly you can see that they are flying up in the air with nothing to stop them because there's no gravity. Okay. If we were to add gravity, let's just do that. Minus 0.8. We would start to see them fly up and drop out. And this is something like you can imagine like a fountain effect. In fact, if we change the direction perhaps there to 1 as well, you can see this is kind of firing it out at different rates, you see. And because we've got a minimum and maximum, let's just set it to 4 maybe to give us a better chance. You can see a really cool fly off here, and they're dropping down. Right. So this is something you might want to consider if you're doing like a more natural particle effect, like a waterfall, where you would fire it out, but it wouldn't actually go on and upwards forever. It needs something to pull it down. For things like smoke and fire, you would not have gravity involved, but for something like water, that's a good example of where you would use something like that. Okay, so that's the min and max volume, but you'll notice it is emitting from 1 point. Okay, I'm going to turn that back off again so that it fires in a constant direction. This is a rather good example, actually. I'm going to set them to the same speed. Let's go for 1 and 1. There. That's perfect. Right, now what we've got here at the moment is them coming out in a nice straight line, and that's what spread allows us to adjust. If I change this now, this spread is like a cone that moves outwards. It's a bit of an odd one. If I just change that, let's just change that to 15. You'll start to see things that go out in various directions from where it currently is. Now, I'm going to wrap this right up. I'm going to make this back up to 1,000 again. And now you can really see what's going on, can't you? All right, so that's 15 there. I think it's meant to be in degrees. So where were we? And then we can rattle this up, and you can get an idea. So that's 15. You can see it's kind of going every direction 50 degrees. I think if you do 180, that's the maximum. So that's absolutely every direction. Okay, and I'd imagine if you do 90, it'll only be forward. Oh yes, no, of course that makes sense, right? It's only going to do. Yeah, you can see the angle there. That's a perfect example of what I'm talking about. You see, so you can control this about how it emits outwards. This is a very, very good example, and would be very difficult to prove were it not for using spheres and quads. All right, so quite often you'll want to keep this quite low. Something like 10 degrees, something like that. And blasting out, something like that would be good for fire or smoke or whatever. Okay, the flatness setting allows you to control along the y-axis. Now, this is where I always get confused, which is along the y-axis, and I always end up having to play. But if I just take that to its extreme, you'll see what I'm talking about. There you go. It's now constrained it to one axis, if you see what I mean. So it's spanned out along that axis, and that's a very, you can see where this might be very useful in certain scenarios. But I'll be honest with you, I always have to play around until I get the right direction and axis here. But you can control that and do things, just give it a little bit more kind of control about where it's emitting to. This is for instance good looking smoke, isn't it? Something like that, so you can get a real feel for it. Okay, so that's the velocities that are covered there. Animated velocity, this is where things start to get a little bit more complicated. Okay, so we've got something like angular velocity. Now I'm going to have to bring this right back down again. I'll be honest with you, I'll probably change the spread as well on the velocity here somewhere. Is it spread? Here we go. I'll set that back to 0 there. Okay, so we're getting a nice straight line. Angular velocity controls how much it's spinning as it emits. So let's make this a bit longer as well. Let's make this 5. And I'm going to make the velocity speed 0.2 or something like that. 0.2. So we should easily be able to see them coming out now. Maybe a little bit quicker than that. 0.5, 0.5. Okay. Here we go. That's okay. There we go. Now, at the moment, as you can see, they're coming out like marching soldiers. But the angular velocity gives us a little bit of freedom to play around with these numbers. And as you can see now, they're spinning around in various, either backwards or forwards. And this is something that you can see very, very non-uniform now, and gives us this effect. But if you imagine you've got fire now, if you had this and the quad was facing you towards now, you can see you've got various levels of spin that are happening. Okay, that gives you that control. Right? And again, you've got the velocity curve, which lets you completely override these settings. So if you do select this, it will, as far as I'm aware, it will override anything you put here. Okay, what it's actually saying is, let's do a new curve texture, and it will actually let you say, right, through this lifetime, I want it to be, at the moment it's on 0 degrees, but at the start I want it to be minus, you have to be very, very gentle with this, and then at the end, like that, okay, something like that. And you can see that they are spinning around as per its lifetime here, right? So starting at 0.99 and finishing at, I could probably says down here. Here we go. We can choose the we can choose the minimum and maximum. So let's just set that minus 30, and then 30. All right, and now we're going to get some relatively small amounts. Let's just reset these as well. Hang on, the points. You can control all of this, all right, via. Pop there. There we go. There we go. Now we can control it a little bit easier. It should be a little less frisky now. Okay, there we go. We can see how it runs along those curves. You can fine tune all this stuff. I don't usually touch all these, so play around with those and see how you get on. But again, I tend to use these ones here. Again, just delete the curve, clear that. Okay, let it do its thing here. There we go. Okay, directional velocity. Okay, this is a curve that allows you to control the directions that it travels. Now again, I don't particularly, you can see, here you go, you can see it's fired off in that direction there, right? So you've got a level of, we can make it minus 0.2 and 0.2, oh god, that's gone mad, hang on. So if we do minus 1 and 1, there, you can see now that it's getting a little bit of directional velocity as well. I hope you see that it'll sort of curve around. Right, I don't play around hugely with these, but you get a feel for it. Let's do a load of them again and just have a look and see what the differences are. 1 second. Where's the? There we go. So 1,000. So 2,000. And there you go. Now you get a feel for the directional velocity. Let's just reset those. If we set it to 0, let's do 0 and 1. Now we can get a feel for what that looks like. Perfect. Look at this. You can get a real feel for what it's talking about here, and some of the features you can set. Now, again, I don't know why you would do this. This looks to me like you're creating a whole lot of pain for yourself. But you want to play around with these and see how you go. And again, you can control them via a curve texture if you wish. Okay, so entirely up to you. The orbit velocity I haven't touched. If anybody understands this confuses me. The orbital velocity. The radial velocity, same thing. I'm not quite sure how that works again, so do let me know if you want to understand those bits. And velocity limits, okay? I think this allows you to control how fast these things can go, right? So some, and you can set a curve on it to say some are allowed to and some aren't. This is very cool now. What's happening? There we go. Okay. Moving on to accelerations, and we have gravity. We know how this works now, don't we? We can do it minus 9.8. And there we go. We've got a kind of drop there. All right, I'm just going to click on 0 there. Oh, of course, you can make it a lot smaller. Of course, you can make it something like on the moon or something. And then you're going to have a sort of a stream going across like that. I've got far too many boxes going on for that to make sense, so I'm going to remove that down there. We've got things like linear acceleration. So this allows you to increase its speed as it moves, or between a minimum and maximum, again, using a curve if you wish. Okay, I don't touch these. Acceleration seems unnecessary to me for a particle effect, but it should allow you to adjust the accelerations if you wish. The radial acceleration allows you to do something rather cool. If I need to actually change the spread, I think, for this to be more relevant. So let's just do 30. Okay, here we go. We can start to see it all spanning out. I really like that effect. But now what we can do is we can actually create a sort of a pull or a push towards this point here. Let's try something like -3 and 0. Okay, so it always starts off with a bit of a whoosh. I'm not sure why. So there we go. So now you can see that some are okay, some are pushing out, and some of them are getting away, but some of them are getting pulled back in. Okay, so we can let's try -5. And something like 2 maybe. So some of them are going to get thrown out harder, and some of them are going to get pulled back. I think we should try -7 then, minus 10. You get the idea. You can see some of them are getting pulled back in, back to the point, and getting thrown the other direction despite their speed. You can see they're really struggling to get back, and they're having to sit here, and they'll get pulled back. I like that effect. It's a effect. It's well documented on the Godot website, and it gives an interesting effect if you want to create some sort of gravity style pullback. I don't know where you'd use it, but but it's an interesting one. Tangential acceleration creates a sort of a curve effect. If I can show you, I'm hoping. There we go. Creates this sort of spiral effect as it kicks off. Look how cool that is. Yeah, and depending on where it spawns, I think, and the rate depends on whereabouts it fires off. And as it flies off, I think it curves even more. So this could be an effect that you might want to use. It's making me feel quite queasy watching it. I might have to reset that. Let's just reset those. There we go. So we've got something a little bit cleaner. Yeah, there you go. Now you get a real feel for it, don't you? You can see that as it sprays out, it's kind of turning around the curve depending on the spread. Absolutely brilliant. Absolutely lovely effect. That I really like that one. Okay, damping, like I say, this is to do all about deceleration, and I don't understand it enough, but you could use it to start slowing things down and particles and things like that. Definitely maybe something you want to play around with. Attractors I haven't actually mentioned, but what you can have is what's called a GPU attractor node. GPU attractor box and a GPU attractor sphere 3D, things like this. Now what these do is they can actually affect the path of the particle as they pass through them. Now, honestly, I've not been using them. I've not used them. I played around with them. I found them quite difficult to get the hang of. They almost seem like they're a sort of mathematical experiment, things you could do with maybe playing around with in the classroom. They don't seem to have any real effect that you might want to use in a particle effect. But by all means, take a look at those. Again, it's on the documentation, but I've not really found a huge use case for them. So let's turn these guys off as well. So we're back to where we were. There we go, sorry. Okay, so we're spawning out. There we go, lovely. Display. Right, so now we can start talking about how these things look over time. Okay, the first one being scale. Now, the scale min, scale max, right? So what we can do here is we can say, well, depending on the size, let's say the size of the box. Let's just say 0.1 and 1. All right, so now you can see the boxes are a different random size, which is tremendous. You can actually do the different. This is a sort of thing you would want when you're creating a file. You would put 0.1 on one, but when you're creating sort of effects that you want to have a little bit of difference to them, you would have a bit of that going on there. The scale curve, so you can say right over time. Let's just create a new curve texture. I'll just reset that. I think the reason some of these things has been freaking out is because I've been setting those and setting the scale curve as well. But now what we can do, you see they've all gone back to the same size again, but what we can do is we can make them start small and get bigger. There we go. And you see we can adjust this curve, and perhaps we can make it go like something like really big and stay big, or perhaps big and then go small again. Right, so this is how that curve works, yeah. So, and this is definitely something I've used a lot of. When you're using a quad mesh, you want the scale to get smaller. Perhaps as the smoke gets smaller, something like that. This is a really good example of how you can do things like that, or perhaps it just stays alive. So, sorry, just so you know, you can click by left clicking. It creates a new thing. If you right click, it removes it. And you probably notice the bars there. You can adjust these. This is standard Godot curve stuff, right? So you don't need to. Know about particle 3Ds to use these. Okay, and we've got ourselves our sort of curves, our scales there. I'll bring that back a little bit, shall we, so it goes a bit smaller. There, I like that effect there. All right, okay. And yeah, you can set your min and max values and all that stuff as part of the curve. Like I say, I think maybe adjusting the scale min and max was messing all that up. You've got scale over velocity, so as things get faster, you can make the scale bigger or smaller. We don't touch the accelerations, do we? So this is going to be, the velocity is not going to change. Okay, potentially you could say, well, if it's running faster, then it needs to be bigger. Stuff like that. A little bit maybe worth having a play with. I haven't touched them. The other thing is color curves. I use this particularly for defining the alpha curve here to say over time grey out. So let's just let me show you how that looks. This may not work initially. Let's just find out because sorry, what have I just done then? Hang on. Color curve, curve texture. Click on the curve, new curve, and then if I'm lucky, I can do that and then click again. It might be a bit easy to spot actually if I remove the scale curve. All right, now that's not working initially, and this is because we need to go to the draw pass here. We need to give it a material. So let's just go to the draw pass, and under material, we'll click on new standard material 3D. And if we click on here, under transparency, we need to have this alpha. Okay, and now that should allow us to, and what we might do is just the albedo's there, that's fine. So we should now be able to set the alpha curve. So let's just have another go with that. I'm sorry, there is a setting that I had forgotten, and it's a big one. It's the vertex color here. You need to click as use as albedo. This has caught me out before, and what that allows me now to do is set up the alpha curve. So here we go. So now we can click on new curve texture again, and then click on curve, new curve. Initially it'll be empty because there's nothing there, but what we can now do is create our alpha curve. There we go. How cool is that? I might just change the spread just to make that look a little bit more clear. Maybe 10 or something. And now we should start to see that fade away. Look at that. Now that's almost a smoke effect there, isn't it? That's actually a rather good looking smoke effect there. You're just using boxes. Now again, I think this is inefficient because it's using boxes, but gosh, you could, from that sort of angle, you could use that as smoke, couldn't you? Yeah. So this is cool. So what this these allow you to do, let's just keep that where it is set things like a color ramp. Okay. So this is actually a color ramp allows you to change the color over time. So let's just do a new gradient texture 1D. This if I click on here, gradient. Now, this doesn't always work for me. Let's just give it a quick go. Let's just try from red to green or something like that. Red to white. There we go. It's working on this occasion. I think once you start using emissions, it starts to mess up. We'll go red to yellow. Look there. And now we've created a fire effect. We've created a fire effect without even thinking about it. Okay, there you go. So you can choose the gradient, the color ramp over time. You can also, if you wouldn't mind going away, thank you. you can have a color initial ramp. What this is saying here is a selection of colors that it can go along. If you choose this, you can. It's not going to play nice with that one. So let's get rid of that, and then we'll just have a selection of colors. Perhaps here we'll say, right, you range from green there. In the middle we'll have a color blue, something like that, and then over here we'll have red, shall we? Red, like that. Right, and then you can see now. So what's happening now is it's picking a color somewhere along that color ramp. Okay. Sorry, bring that back. There we go. Okay, that's the sort of thing you can do. And an emission curve, again, this controls the emission level. So you can choose the amount of emission over time that during when it's being displayed, the emission levels. Okay, the hue variation, again, for this to be shown, I think I need to. Actually, I didn't need to get rid of the alpha curve, but the hue variation allows us to say, well, pick colors in between the what this color is here. I don't know if this is going to work for me there, and you can choose hue. I don't use this. It seems too this hue variation seems too fiddly to me to get a meaningful color, but you get the idea. If I'm using it, it's only going to be very, very subtle. Okay, so you got the hue variation there. Okay. The animation settings are used when you use an animation sprite sheet. So the only time I've actually used this is where the settings here, I just set the speed to min to 1 and the max to 1. I don't touch the other values, but you can see that you could potentially change the speed of the animation, or indeed, set some of the ways it starts and stops and all that stuff. I wouldn't touch any of that initially, at least, to get your animation going. We'll be having a play with that a bit later on, because we will be using a sprite sheet animation for the fire. So we'll have a play with that a bit later on, but that's what that's used for. And that is all of the settings that we're going to cover today in the process material. So I hope that makes sense. So now that we've done all this, let's go and get some examples of how we can use these in the real world. Okay, so let's get started with a nice easy one. What we're going to do is we're going to create this spinning sphere here. It's got a few characteristics about it. Its alpha comes in and out, and obviously, as you can see, it rotates. So the rotation is actually done by a script, but everything else will do using particle effects. So let's get back to our scene and add it in. Okay, so I have added a directional light 3D and a camera 3D to our scene, so we can take a look at what it looks like when we run it. May need to move these, but for now we'll just keep them where they are. So what I'm going to do, and click preview there, and I'm going to right click here, okay, and then I'm going to click attach child node, and it's going to be a GPU particles 3D. Perfect. Let's click on create, drag it up, and what we'll need to do immediately is add a draw pass and a process material. Let's add the draw pass first, which is going to be a sphere, a new sphere mesh. All right, it's very, very small, and it's down there for some reason, and we will click on the size. I want to make this quite small. Let's just try 0.1. That needs to be 0.2. And then let's add the process material here. New particle process material. There we go. We've got that dropping. We know why that's dropping, right? We know that's big dropping because of gravity, and that's certainly not something we want to have here. So let's just go into our particle process material, look at accelerations, gravity, and change that to 0. Okay, now from memory, you may remember that it's the sphere surface that we need to use here for our point of emissions. So let's go over to spawn, position, and if we click here on point, we can choose sphere surface, and we can see that now it is actually working around that sphere. Now I think what I actually set the radius to was 2, and I think that's okay. Let's have a quick look in our camera, see how we're looking. Oh, let's see what, and let's also up the number of particles to something ridiculous like 600 for now. And there, that's promising. So if we go to the camera 3D, click on preview, camera 3D, preview. Okay, we're a little low, so let's get that camera. We selected, there we go, and on here, let's try 10. Oh, 8. There we go, that's absolutely fine. Okay, this is way too many particles. Let's get that right down to something like 300. I want this to last a lot longer, maybe something like 10 seconds. Which probably means we don't need anywhere near 300. I'll try 200. And we've got this weird effect where it's doing them like drawing them very, very slowly. But once they're all drawn, they will be they will come and go at 200 will be displayed at any one time. What I'd like to have here is the kind of fading in and out. So what we will do is we will go to our draw pass here, click on down, and then we're going to add a material to it. So if we click on standard material here, now let's go through the motions, make sure we get this right. We want to have the, transparency is alpha. Shading I'm actually going to turn off, so I'm going to do unshaded, and that creates this effect here, which I rather like. I rather like that effect. It just gives it a flat look. Okay, the vertex color must be used as albedo, or we're going to have problems. And then under the albedo, I'll just pick a color that I like the look of. Maybe a light blue, like the previous one. Okay, now one thing I'm thinking already is that this sphere is much too big. Let's go half the size. 0.1. Okay, and that's not bad. Now, if we go over to our display here, under color curves, under alpha curve, we can have a new curve texture, and then we'll click on that, and then what we'll do is we'll have it, click on new curve eventually. There we go, and we'll click in here, and we'll have it at the top, and then we'll have one at the bottom there, and then another one, something like that, so that we've got it fades in and fades out, and that's already looking really good, I think. Obviously it's not rotating yet. Okay, and we can fix that very, very easily. So what we're going to do is we're going to go here. Let's just rename it as well. Should we call it spinning sphere? Lovely. And we're going to create a script for it. So click on here. Spin. I'll put it in lowercase. I haven't bothered putting any of these in folders or anything. Obviously, you would normally do that as part of a project, but for what we're doing here, we're just going to crack on and get it done. So we're not interested in ready. What we want this to do is to rotate every frame. So let's actually just give it a rotation speed. Export var rotation speed. I think we're something like 0.25. And then under process here, we can say rotate Y delta times rotation speed. Okay. And now if we run this, okay, that it doesn't look to be rotating, and I think I know why that is. We need to go over to the drawing, which I've now lost. Where are you? Drawing, there we are, and click on local coords. And the other thing was that it was not, it was gradually fading in, and what we really want to do is have that pre-processed, so it's already started. So let's try 20 there. Okay, now if we click on 3D now, we may I think that'll be okay the next time it does the pre-process. I think it's just taking its time this time. But if I turn this off, we may have to wait a few seconds. I feel like this is a slight bug in Godot here. You have to wait for it to finish and then turn it back on again. Okay, if we turn it back on, pop, there we go. This is much better. And now it may well, our script, now that we've turned the local coords on, if we run it again, what do we have? A lovely spinning sphere. How quickly and easy was that done? That's obviously because I knew what I was doing, but hopefully some of that is very familiar to you. The spinning sphere, the sphere surface on the point emission, and we've got ourselves a rather cool looking effect there. Something, you know, maybe you could use for a sort of an ornament or something like that, a high tech ornament that you could use as part of your game assets. Now, just a brief eye on the emissions and things like interpolate and fractional delta. Can we reduce these? In fact, can we even turn them off? We've got 30 frames a second right now. This isn't doing anything, okay, other than staying where it is, fading in and fading out. So I might even try 15 frames a second. I think that's enough frames. Literally, all it is doing is fading in and out. That may well be enough. It looks okay to me there. I think 200 seems to be about right. I'm not going to spend a huge amount of time optimizing this because ultimately it may be for nothing. But that looks pretty good to me off the bat there. We've managed to turn it down to a fixed 15 frames per second and turn interpolate and fractional delta off. So this should be a very, very efficient particle effect that you can include in your game. Okay, so finally, let's take a look at creating this beauty. It's a roaring fire, as you can see. This is all purely a particle effect, no scripts here whatsoever. It moves from a kind of a red hot at the bottom to an orange and then to a smoky finish at the top. I've added some sticks and some stones at the bottom. We won't do that as part of this tutorial. I'm sure you're capable of doing that with the CSG boxes and CSG spheres. This is going to be all about creating the particle effect. We're going to have to introduce a couple of new things, not really big ones. One is a quad mesh and the other is a particle sprite sheet. So let's have a look at getting that set up and creating this fire. Okay, so let's go about adding our GPU particle 3D. As always, GPU particle 3D. GPU particle 3D, there we go, click on create. I'm actually not going to move this one up this time. I'm going to keep this one near the bottom. Makes sense, doesn't it? It's a fireplace, it would be near the ground. So I'll just click on there, press F. Make sure it's on focus. We want to add our process material and draw passes. Let's focus on the draw passes first. If we click on here, the draw pass, click on pass 1, and we're going to add a new quad mesh this time, something we haven't done before. Okay, a quad mesh, and this is the quad mesh that you would add an image to. So if we click on here, what we can do is if we go down here to material, click on material, new standard material 3D. That then gives us a material we can use, and we can go through here and do the usual pieces. Make sure that alpha is enabled, the shading is unshaded, the vertex color uses albedo, and under the albedo here, what we're actually going to do is we're going to use a billboard texture, a particle texture, a smoke texture that is available on the Godot website as part of their tutorial. Actually, here it is. You can click on the link here. I will put a link into the comments below as well, so you can download this sprite sheet here. Okay, so we will load that texture up, and I'll just do a quick load here. I've obviously already downloaded it, but it's called Particle Sprite Smoke 1.webp. There we go. Click on that, and at the moment it's just excuse me. I have to move this up a bit. It's being a bit of a monkey. No. At the moment, it's just the 8x8 sheet, so we need to tell it to use it as an actual animation. The way we do that for particles is we actually go to Billboard, click on Mode here, and choose Particle Billboard. And what that will do now is that means that particle will always face us now wherever we are. Okay, this is exactly what we're after for things like smoke and stuff. We don't want it to have a back. We want it to always be looking at us. So that's good. So now what we'll also do here, we'll click on Keep Scale so that we can adjust the scale on it. And Particles Anim here. This is actually an 8x8 particle billboard. Okay, this doesn't appear unless you select particle billboard. This will actually be hidden. So if you're wondering where it is, it's because particle billboard won't have been set. Okay, so we've got our particle, but nothing's actually happening to it, which kind of does make sense. We haven't set up our process material yet. So let's click up, let's minimize that, and here, and click on here and do a new particle process material. And let's just drag that up now so we can get a rough idea of what it looks like and cut them across. There we go. Now it's dropping as usual because of the gravity, so let's sort that one out early. Under accelerations, we want to change gravity to 0. But then it doesn't really do anything, it just sort of sits there, and that's because we need to go into display, animation, and set the speed min and speed max. I wish this was defaulted to 1. Because then we'd actually be able to see, at least it trying to move and do something. Now, the reason it's kind of got that weird look at the moment is because we've probably got too many particles. So if I set the amount to 1, there we go. Now we're starting to see something now, aren't we? We're starting to see that it's actually creating smoke and then sort of disappearing like that, which is good. Okay. So I've actually obviously done this before. So I believe the settings I used were 3 for the lifetime and something like 300 for the amount. And then I gave it if we go now down to our spawn position, we want this to be a ring on the emission on the y-axis, 0, and the height to be 0, and the radius to be something like 0.2, I think is what it was. So let's create a small ring down there. That's better, and it has no acceleration, so let's sort that out now. Let's give it some velocity. That's a very small number. Let's try 5, and then we'll set this to something like 1 and 2. It's going in the wrong direction, so let's change that to 1, and that to 0. And you can see at the moment it's quite aggressive, so maybe that's a little too strong. So let's try 0.5 and 1. That's a bit better. Okay, so let's think about how we're going to actually make this get a little bit smaller and start to fade out. So if we go into our scale here, what we want on our scale code, let's just have something like a minimum of 0.5 and 1, so we've got a little bit of variety there. And while we're at it, let's have some angular rotation, which is here, isn't it? Animated velocity. Let's just do something like that between -30 and 30, something like that, just to give it a little bit of rotation as it moves around. And the scale curve, we want this to start getting smaller as it goes up. So let's just click on scale curve, new curve texture, click here, and let's just try that. Okay, that's looking better. That's looking better. It's already starting to disappear. That's very, very good. Okay. And then the usual color curve is one of my favorites here. We need to give it a decent alpha curve so that it gradually fades out. So let's just click on new curve texture. Where did that go? Up here. It moved it up there. Click on curve, new curve. And it's not going to be happy. So we'll just do this. I think that the way to do this is to get it to fade in a little bit as well, because it looks a bit aggressive coming in there. That's a better look coming in, and I think by the same token we want it fading out reasonably soon. Okay, this is starting to look better. It's not perfect yet, and obviously it's very, very white. So how do we go about making it so that it looks orange at the top, orange at the bottom, and then gradually go to sort of yellow and then black? Well, we need to create a color gradient. And let's give that an early go. Here we got a color ramp, they call it, don't they? So a color ramp, but you set the gradient here, and these are the colors. Now it's done something. Look, it's gone from black to white, which isn't quite what we're after. What we're after is more of a initial color here of orange. So I'll go to red, and then orangey, and then there. Okay, we're happy. And then here-ish, let's click on that. Click there and do a yellow color. Perfect. That one there, and then at the end we want more of a black here. We want that to be black. Okay, and we may need to move this way to make it look more black as we go. There we go. I'm going to have to play around with these values a little bit until I get something I'm happy with. Now it's a bit aggressive at the moment. And the reason for that is what I like to do here on the black one here is click here, click there, and change the alpha to something a little more friendly. Now, I think this is very, very good. I think the velocities is the problem here. I think I'm going to try 0.2, 0.5. Even that. Sorry, that's the animation, isn't it? Sorry, where's the velocity? Yeah. Oh, let's change those. What was that? Let's do -30 to 30 again. And change the velocity up here. Yeah, let's try 0.2, 0.5. That's a bit better. Although it's puffing out a little bit there, isn't it? Let's try 0.5 and 1. That's a bit better. Now, I'm not loving the colours here, so we may need to have a little play to get the colours right. I'm going to try changing that to yellow and that one to orange. You've got to be double careful that you have selected it. Okay, and let's go with this one to an orangey colour. About there. I'm going to pull that in a bit closer as well. Like that. And that's obviously quite a... Let's bring that around. Now we're talking. If I bring this in, this one, I think we can start to see a real effect. There we go. Okay, this is good. This is much, much better. And we'll just have a quick look at the scale again. I might just change this to be a little bit more aggressive on the scale. Maybe not that aggressive. Somewhere like that. No, I'm going to remove that. Okay, so you can see what I'm doing. I'm playing around here until I get a kind of a particle effect that I like, and I'm already liking this. This is quite an aggressive fire. I think if I had a choice, I'd make that maybe just move this back over here until I find a value I like. There we go, something like that. Okay, now we're talking. Okay, I think what I might just finish with is to just get rid of view and just start to get this a little bit more aggressive. So if I just do that. There, that's better. Now we're talking there. Now I've got a fireplace that I like the look of. That's much, much better. Okay, so there we go. We've got our fire now. Just hide that away. Oh, hide that away there. That's a fire that isn't too bad. Now you can see, obviously, I've tweaked the values from the previous one, so there's a little less of this puff going on. But you get the general idea. This is how you can create a really cracky looking fireplace. I will put a link to the original fire that I created after having about half an hour of tweaking around with it. But you can soon see that you can create a really cool effect in next to no time in Godot with particle effects once you know what you are doing. Guys, thank you so much for watching. I hope this has been a useful tutorial for you. Well done for sticking it out this long. I know it's been a long one, but I wanted to try and cover as much as I could, so I hope it's been helpful. Please put any comments, suggestions, what have you, in the comments below, and I will do my utmost to respond to them and help out where I can. All right, until next time, folks. Next time we're going to be looking at a lot more complicated elements of the particle effects, but for now I think we're going to stop here for the sake of your sanity and mine, and look forward to doing the next tutorial. Until next time, folks, all the best. Shark out.